Tennessee football currently has a top 5 recruiting class in the country. Will it stay that way all the way until December? And which is more likely, 9-3 this season or 9-3 next season? All that and more, your Twitter Tuesday questions here on this mailbag edition of Locked On Vols.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody, and welcome into it. This is Locked On Vols, your go-to Tennessee Volunteers podcast each and every day. It's your first watch, your first listen, and it's on YouTube, wherever you find your podcasts. I'm your host, Eric Kane. You can find this podcast always at _Kaner and at Locked On Vols, and today is brought to you in part by LinkedIn. I want to thank LinkedIn for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. We've got tons of questions that you guys have submitted at _Kaner, at Locked On Vols, and on my Facebook page at Kaner on Air. A lot of recruiting, a lot of football, just a lot of questions to get into. So we're going to spend segments 1 and 2 answering those, and then we're going to get back into our starter spotlight. We're going to go to safety. I know you guys are, or I'm going to give myself a little bit of a cop-out here because, again, the cornerbacks are the big question marks in the star position. So we're going to go to safety, and we're going to go to one of those veteran safeties today and discuss Jayla McClain for starter spotlight. So all that coming up today here on Locked On Vols. And again, guys, can't thank you enough for making Locked On Vols your first listen each and every day. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. We will start on the YouTube page where someone requested a comment on the YouTube section. That was Brent Fisher. Kaner, we've seen the ebbs and flows of great recruiting in year number 2 of head coaches at UT over the years. Butch and Pruitt specifically had fantastic year 2s in the summer. Of course, a lot of those with Pruitt happened in the COVID year and never really honored the commitment. This just feels totally different. These are really, really high quality 4- and 5-star guys mixed in both offensively and defensively. Do you think when it's all said and done that this will be the best class for UT in the past 10 years? Love your pods and everything you do. Appreciate that, Brent. Thank you so much. I see you on the comment section just about every day. Really, really does mean a lot. All right, so I went ahead and mapped it out. And, of course, we're using rivals here on the show. And I mapped out what Tennessee's concluding recruiting ranking was each of the last 10 years. Right now, Tennessee sits 5th in the country. Long way to go. In 2022 cycle, Tennessee finished 13, so fringe top 10. And I recognize, maybe 247 had Tennessee in the top 10, or On3 had Tennessee maybe at 11, or ESPN or whatever. These are just the rival rankings. 2021 cycle had Tennessee finishing 35, but remember that's that run you talked about with Pruitt's in year 2 or in year 3, I guess it was. But so many of those guys came off the board, and then there was a coaching change in a COVID year where Tennessee finished 3-7. So that's a little bit of an anomaly, but Tennessee finished 35th in the recruiting rankings. Then plus a lot of those guys that signed asked out of their letters of intent. So a little bit of a weird year. 2020, it was 8th in the country. 2019, it was 13th. 2018, it was 20th. 2017 and 16, Tennessee finished 15th in the country. 2015 and 2014, under Butch Jones, Tennessee finished 5th in the country. 2013, it finished 21st. And 2012, it finished 27th. So as you can see, there were a couple of years that were really prosperous for the University of Tennessee, specifically 2013 or 2015 and 2014, where Tennessee finished 5th in the end results of recruiting. And those were some really, really good years under Butch Jones. Evan Berry was in one of those class. I believe he was in the 2014 class. You had Alvin Kamara, who was in the 2015 class. Khalil McKenzie was in the 2015 class. You had Drew Richmond, who was in the 2015 class. All those guys are 5-star prospects that I'm rattling off right there. Jalen Hurd was in one of those classes. So in terms of, will this be the best recruiting class of the last 10 years? I'm not ready to say that, guys. And again, someone's going to ask about this later on in the show, and I'll kind of touch base on it again when we get there. But I think this class will be a top 10 class. It might be 9, it might be 10, but I think it'll be somewhere around there. It's got 18 commits right now, which is really solid. It's obviously got a 5-star quarterback. It's got 7 really productive 4 stars, highly rated 4 stars. And they've got some really highly rated 3-stars that could turn into 4-stars whenever things cycle back up here in a couple of months. So we'll see. This is a really solid class. But in terms of some of those classes, 2015, 14 specifically, some of those Butch Jones years, I mean, 2013 under Jeremy Pruitt was really, really good. Or excuse me, 2019 under Jeremy Pruitt was really, really good, and it finished 13th. And 2020 was a top 10 class. So I'm not ready to say that it's going to be one of the better ones the last 10 years, but it has the making to be a really, really solid class. I will go ahead and say that for sure. We'll go ahead and move on to the DMs here on Twitter. And we'll check in with Kurt. Kurt wants to know, what's the best run of recruiting you've seen at Tennessee, whether it's been a weekend run like Heupel just had or overall class that was tremendous. Talked about some of those classes. And again, I wasn't covering recruiting, and I really wasn't even in the media back then when Butch Jones was here on Tennessee. My first year in terms of the quote-unquote media, my first year at the radio station was the 2017 season. I was fresh out of graduate school, and I didn't have a clue what was going on. And boy, that coaching search, I mean, I was like 3 months on the job. I wasn't even really ready for it. But nonetheless, I didn't see a lot of those classes. But I will say this, that class for Jeremy Pruitt in 2021, that is the best run that I've seen so far for Tennessee. And let me explain it to you. That class ended up finishing 35th in the country. At the time, I want to say it finished like 20th, maybe 21st, because there were, that was the year, it was a COVID year. Tennessee played 10 games. Tennessee went 3-7. By the time the season was coming to a close, towards the offseason, obviously, or by the time Tennessee's season was coming to a close, they finished with a 3-7 record. By the time Tennessee got back for semester number 2, Jeremy Pruitt was fired. So about 4 to 5 of those guys who actually signed their national letter of intent got out of it. And so that affected the rankings. A lot of those players decommitted who were a part of the class before it reached National Signing Day, just because of the unfortunate season that was. But in the month of April and May, if you guys remember, Tennessee went through a run to where it was getting 2, 3, 4 at a time in terms of a week. And, not just prospects. I mean, highly rated 4-stars, really, really good, solid 4-stars. The spring of the COVID year in 2020, that for the class of 2021, was really, really good. So I'll say the spring months, April and May, the best recruiting run I've seen from Tennessee so far. But the one Heupel just got off of, really this whole month of July has been really, really good. We'll go on to Tennessee Dad. Hopefully it gets covered. This question I'm about to ask. We have a lot of developed talent on the roster this year, more God-given talent coming in next year. So are we more likely to go 9-3 this year or next year? I think we could be just as good next year. Yeah, that's the hope, man. You hope that even with the young guys coming in this year, some of those young edge rushers, some of these young receivers, some of these young, offensive and defensive linemen, you hope that they can continue to get some playing time and get developed. That way that they can step up to the plate, no pun intended, so that whenever guys like Hendon Hooker step aside, guys like Byron Young, guys like Cedric Tillman, your 2 veteran safeties, guys who are big parts of your football team who won't be here in the season of 2023, those young guys will have been developed by then to where they can kind of carry the torch. That's the thing about college football is you kind of go through cycles, right? Because you only have 4 to 5 years, sometimes 3 years if you're really, really good, to take advantage of these student athletes. So I almost want to say this year you have a better chance. And that does not mean that I think Tennessee's going to struggle in 2023, but let's be real here. You're going to be having a new quarterback. Hendon Hooker will not be your quarterback. Will it be a true freshman in Nico Iamaliava? Will it be a second-year player in Taven Jackson? Will it be a 6-year player in Joe Milton who is still stuck around? I don't know. I can't answer that right now. You won't have Cedric Tillman. What will that receiver room look like? Can Brew McCoy and Jalen Hyatt step up to be who we think they are by then? We'll have to see. That linebacker room will have turned over. No more Jeremy Banks. No more Aaron Beasley. No more Solon Page. No more Juwan Mitchell. I want to say this year. I really, really do. But that doesn't mean that I think Tennessee's just going to suck in 2023. I hope you guys know where I'm coming from there. So that's a really interesting question. Really, really good question from Tennessee Dad. We'll continue on here. Just a couple more here in segment number 1. Then we'll hit the reset. Let's go to Danny. Danny wants to know, are there any recruits we should keep an eye on for soon-to-be commitments? Well, Lucas Simmons, of course, earlier on Monday at 1 o'clock Eastern time, chose the Noles of Florida State over Tennessee. Felt like that was coming. That's unfortunate because Tennessee really likes him as an offensive tackle. So he's off the board now. That makes Stanton Ramel that much more of a priority, the offensive tackle from Alabama. He has not announced a commitment date just yet, but feel like it's going to be soon, maybe in the next week or so. So Stanton Ramel, the offensive tackle, is an absolute priority for Tennessee. And then Tennessee needs to continue to try to reel in the wide receiver, Nathan Laycock, who I feel like has been really sitting pretty with the Volunteers for quite some time. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been on commitment watch with him for a while, but I believe he's going to be pushing it back towards the middle of the month. So again, that can be in the next, week to 10 days as well. But Stanton Ramel and Nathan Laycock, offensive tackle and wide receiver, would be the next two that will come off the board, in my opinion, as of now. But you guys know recruiting, it can change by the day. And then we'll finish up here with K. Wayne. K. Wayne reached out to me and asked me this earlier on a Monday. I was listening at John and Jimmy, and I think it was Friday. They had ESPN's Craig Heupel on. As I know, I'm probably mispronouncing his name. I apologize. He's a recruiting expert for ESPN. He stated that Will Stallings has now made the switch from running back to linebacker for his senior season because that's what he plans to play in college. Vince questioned him on it, but he persisted with it. Everything I've heard is that Tennessee is recruiting him to play running back, and that he would at least start at running back. Has something changed over the last 2 weeks or so? Or was this guy just mistaken? Really, really good question. Let's hear that. I went and pulled that audio. This is what K. Wayne is talking about from Sports Talk last Friday, a couple days ago, with Jimmy Himes and Vince Ferrara, with ESPN recruiting analyst Chris Heupel. Again, I'm botching his name. Craig Heupel. I do apologize, but this is what K. Wayne is talking about right here.
Had a chance to get out to Bishop Gorman, did a pro day there just for that school alone because they got so many prospects. And I think Will Stallings, another guy, made the transition from running back to linebacker. And I think that's a good fit for him. He kind of played running back like a linebacker. He's a real physical presence. I think he's a guy who's continuing to kind of grow into his own. So there are two guys there that we would kind of put in the quote-unquote high 3-star range that I think are really good pickups. But like I said, T-Lander is a guy that we need to take another look at again as potential 4-star.
So you think for Tennessee and in college, Stallings projects more as a linebacker than a running back?
Yeah, that's my understanding. That's what he's going to play. I know that's the move that he made over there at Gorman as well. And I think just he's explosive and he's physical. I just don't know if he ran like a laser to laser, 4.6. A little high 4.6, which is really good. I mean, again, that's not hand time, that's laser. So I certainly think he's capable of playing running back, but I think his long-term best fit is there at linebacker.
Yeah, he's absolutely right in terms of Vince was following up and he was persistent with it. I have checked into this, and again, as far as I know, I've spoken to two people on this matter. They cover recruiting just like I do. One's a colleague of mine. Someone else is from another publication that covers recruiting like I do. To my knowledge, he's playing running back here at Tennessee. I have not heard anything different. Now, he is 6'1", 223 pounds, and he runs a 4.6, a high 4.6. He's not the fastest guy in the world. Could he play linebacker? Sure. Is he going to play linebacker at Bishop Gorman as well? I don't know. Could he eventually end up at linebacker? He could. He's not a burner. But as far as I know, and as far as everybody that I've checked with, he is coming to Tennessee to play running back. So we'll track this. We'll continue to track this. Good observation, K. Wayne, but that's all I know right now. Things can always change, but we will have to see, especially as he continues his senior season. He very well may play linebacker for Bishop Gorman this year and running back, but I think he's coming to Tennessee to be a running back. But again, things can always change. We'll get into some more Twitter Tuesday for this mailbag edition of Locked On Vols. But first, I'll remind you guys about LinkedIn Jobs. As the sun comes out and small businesses are getting back into business, LinkedIn Jobs makes it easier to grow your team. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the people you want to interview faster and for free. Create a job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. Then add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring so your network can help find you the right people to hire. Simple tools like screening options make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know every single week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We'll go back into segment number 2 of a Twitter Tuesday show, a mailbag edition of Locked On Vols, where we answer your questions each and every week. I'm your host, Eric Kane. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vols your first listen. We continue on now with Becky. Becky asks, do you have a feel for how many of the current commits are planning on enrolling early? Yeah, good question. We never really kind of know this early into it, but I know the majority of the class will enroll early. That's just kind of the norm nowadays. I mean, really for Tennessee in the class of 2022, only about I want to say all but 6 to 7 reported for the spring semester, because again, you get a head start on everything, academics, you're standing on the team, strength and conditioning, all that type of stuff. I mean, Nico Iamaleava will be here as an early enrollee. I can promise you that. Ethan Davis will be here, the 4-star tight end. I would imagine Aiden Bussell, the offensive lineman, will be here. Caleb Herring, I would imagine, will be here. Nathan Robinson, I'd imagine, would be here. Trevor Duncan, who attends Knoxville Catholic, probably will not be here. Knoxville Catholic has kind of a rule to where you can't really graduate early. I remember that being the case with Cooper Mays. But those are some off the top of my head that I feel like will be here. But typically, again, pretty much it's almost the norm. Not everybody, but it's almost the norm that you will arrive early. So I would say the majority of this class will, who end up signing with the University of Tennessee. We'll go on now to Braden. With the big 3 commitments from this weekend, who would you compare each of them to? Okay, I am really bad at the comparison games. I'm not even going to lie to you. I'm not going to try to act like I'm smart. And I gave this some thought, don't get me wrong, but I am horrible at comparisons. So just putting this out here. And I tried to compare them to guys on Tennessee's team or in recent memory. So I didn't go NFL. I didn't go around the SEC. I tried to keep it localized a little bit, okay? So for Shandavion Bradley, I would say kind of a James Pierce. Tall guy in stature, room to put on a lot of weight, just raw athletic ability, really, really strong. Shandavion's way more, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe has a lot more finesse than James Pierce does, but just from a raw athletic talent ability, those two guys and play the same position, of course. I think they kind of go hand in hand. We'll go Jalen Smith. And here's a comparison, and I know some of you guys might not like this, but hear me out. Aaron Beasley. I think Jalen Smith can be better than Aaron Beasley. And again, I'm not trying to crap all over Aaron Beasley here. I know it's what it sounds like when I did the starter spotlight and what I'm saying right now. But I think Jalen Smith has more talent than Aaron Beasley. But in terms of smaller, undersized linebackers, but guys who can move, guys that can run sideline to sideline, guys who can cover a whole lot of ground, and guys who are kind of tackle machines. And that's kind of what you are playing in the middle of the defense. So that's what I view kind of Jalen Smith there. But I think Jalen Smith has a much higher upside and a higher ceiling than that of Aaron Beasley. And then finally, Sham Umorov, maybe a Marcus Tatum. Tatum was very undersized coming to Tennessee. Now, Sham is not necessarily that, but, Sham is 6'6", about 310. I think Marcus Tatum was about 6'4", 6'5", about 270 when he got to Tennessee. He had to pack it on to get over 300 pounds, and that's something he struggled with throughout his entire Tennessee career. But in terms of just being really, really athletic, having good feet, and just really raw at the position, but having a lot of talent, a lot of room to put on weight, I guess is what I'm trying to say, in both of those guys' frames. And that's kind of how I see the comparison there. So I know that was really probably bad. I apologize. But again, like I said, I am not good with comparisons. So if you guys have anything better, please, the floor is yours. _Kane or Locked On Vols, and check in those comment sections. All right, we will go to Trevor. Trevor asks, I think we've touched on this before, but I don't remember 100%. Was it a good thing that we lost so many players going into last season? After getting picked apart by the transfer portal, the expectations were low for this team, but we exceeded those expectations. How do you see last season turning out if those players stayed to play for the current coaching staff? Would it have hurt team chemistry from last year? Who's to know, right? We don't ever know because they weren't here. Who's to say if they were here, they wouldn't have added to it? I'll say this, anytime you're picked apart by the transfer portal, that's not typically a good thing. Remember, we always harp on depth on this show. Tennessee had no depth whatsoever at wide receiver because they only played 3 guys. No one else was ready to go. Really 4 guys. They had no depth at linebacker. They didn't have much depth in the secondary. Points and times, they didn't have a whole lot of depth on the defensive line. But ultimately, you know what I'm trying to say. I think guys like Eric Gray would have fit in perfectly in this offense. Henry To'oTo'o would have obviously played at linebacker. Okay. He's a good player. What about guys like Quavaris Crouch? Would he have really, he was not a good linebacker when he was here at Tennessee. In the SEC, it's kind of going away from the ground and pound. You're having to run and cover a lot of space. Would he have been the best linebacker fit in the system? I don't know. Who's to know? I mean, he's a really, really good athlete, but I don't know. So in terms of, it's still not a good thing that those guys left because of depth purposes, where I think you could have won a couple more games last year if you had some depth. I do think that, the group that stayed here and welcomed the challenges and welcomed the new coaching staff. Obviously, they had a special bond. It was kind of like them against the world. So I do think that that counts for something. But at the end of the day, those are some really talented players that left the program that could have helped Tennessee last year. Again, I'll go back. Eric Gray would have been a great fit for this offense. Henry 12-12 will play linebacker for anybody's team. But guys like Quavaris Crouch, I'm not sure what they would have looked like in this defense or on this offense, or he wouldn't have played offense for sure. All right, we'll move on to Brandon. Brandon wants to know, will Nick Saban cry about Miami recruiting at SEC Media Days? Also, if Bama doesn't land a top 5 recruiting class this year, do you think Saban calls it quits? Good question. I'm sure Saban will cry about something. I'm sure Saban will be really smart about the words he chooses, because I don't think he envisioned that blow up happening last time he was in a public setting. And he talked about the state of college football and name, image, and likeness and how it pertains to recruiting and all that. If Alabama doesn't finish with the top 5 class this year, do I think he quits? Absolutely not. I think that guy will coach football until literally his wife tells him he can't anymore, because that is just who he is. He is a football coach. All right, we'll move on to the Locked On Vols account, and we will go to Blah. Blah wants to know, Tennessee is currently hovering at the end or at close to a top 5 class in the country, pretty much every major recruiting services. How likely is that to stay until the end? Again, we'll see. There's a lot of movements. This is mid-July. National Signing Day is in mid-December, so we will have to see. I like Tennessee's makeup. It's extremely well-rounded. Having a 5-star quarterback really helps in this class. We'll see exactly where it finishes out in mid-December, but I do think that Tennessee, with 18 commits, a really, really strong class so far. Quality players, still some more players to be added. And, there's always going to be guys that Tennessee's going to be trying to flip to the University of Tennessee, and there'll be new names of their merges. I kind of view Tennessee as having a top 10 class, and I've kind of stayed that course throughout the entire spring and the summer so far. So top 5, I don't know. Top 10, I feel confident in saying that Tennessee will likely be a top 10 team when it's all said and done. Ethan meant to submit this for Twitter Tuesday, but forgot due to the long weekend. This is last week. I had questions about Conyer and Eccles. That is Christian Conyer and Jonathan Eccles. Both have some recruiting profiles listing them as an athlete, and some are listing them at a position. Could you explain possibly what makes a side designate their positions? I don't mind waiting till next week. Thanks so much. Yeah, pretty much wherever the recruiting service views them or projects them at the next level. A lot of recruiting services think Christian Conyer can play offense at the next level, which I'm sure he could, but he's going to play defense. So he is a cornerback, but they view him as an athlete. Jonathan Eccles is probably accurately listed as an athlete because, again, he's 2024 and he's a guy that is a defensive end. That's his home position, but Tennessee wants him to play tight end. He plays wide receiver on offense. So technically he hasn't really truly played tight end as kind of like a home base position. So, but Tennessee likes the makeup of him and the projection of him to be a tight end. So he's so young too, so you slap an athlete tag on there. But pretty much whatever the service views them as a projection down the line is kind of what they will list them as kind of moving forward. Good question there, Ethan. And then finally, we'll go and answer a couple that are on Facebook. This one is from Eric. Eric wants to know, if you had to pick a leader for Gibson and Ramel, who would they be? Ricky Gibson? I think that would be Arkansas right now, but Tennessee certainly still recruiting him very, very hard. Tennessee's recruiting Jordan Matthews and Jakeem Jackson at cornerback, but need to be recruiting Ricky Gibson just as hard because, again, you need to get 2 of those 3, in my opinion, and the first 2 kind of have a lean away from Tennessee, if I'm being honest about things right now, in my opinion. Stanton Ramel, I would say he's a Tennessee lean. He's keeping things pretty close to the vest, but Michigan State's involved in that one. You have Auburn that's involved in that one. A couple other teams that are involved in that one. But I would think that Tennessee is a good leader for him right now. But again, he's playing things really, really close to the vest. And then finally, we will conclude here with Matthew. I was wondering, do you think Josh Heupel and staff are that good at recruiting, or are they benefiting from name, image, and likeness and the Spire Group? Good question, Matthew. And again, today's era of college football, you got to ask some of those tough questions. I think Josh Heupel is a good recruiter. I think his staff is doing a nice job. He got a bad rep. I mean, the biggest question about Josh Heupel was, can he recruit when Tennessee hired him? Now, it's a long way to go, and you're still only technically in year 2 of him. So, there's a lot of answers a lot of questions that'll be answered over the next couple of years in that regard. But I mean, think about it. He helped bring in a lot of quality SEC recruits when he was at Missouri, and coached a lot of them. When he was head coach at UCF, you just aren't going to get the quality of recruit that you would get at a Power 5 program. You're just not. So he's having that chance to now here at Tennessee, and he's benefiting from it. It's about relationships. This staff does a really, really good job with relationships, because not every prospect that Tennessee signs or gets committed right now will have that many of name, image, and likeness opportunities in the future. Just point of it. It's there, but not every recruit's going to be benefiting from their name, image, and likeness like some of them will. So a little bit of both, but I would say more so than anything, at the end of the day, it still goes down to relationships. And I think that this staff is doing a really, really good job in that regard. All right, that's going to do it here for this edition of Twitter Tuesday. Thank you guys so much for getting in your questions, your comments at _ Caner and at Locked On Vols. We'll come back and tie a bow on this episode with a little starter spotlight talking Jayla McClain here in just one moment. But BetOnline.net, your source for all your sports betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, reality television, and, of course, scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It's the easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, golf, and the PGA and Live Golf. Head on over to the website today or use your mobile device. Learn about all the latest trends and all the action. BetOnline.net. It is where the game starts. Time to wrap things up here on a Tuesday, guys. Appreciate you for making Locked On Vols your first listen and for participating in the mailbag episodes like you guys do each and every week. All right, let's get back into Starter Spotlight. We'll make this short and sweet because we had tons of questions to get into from earlier in the show. Don't want to keep you guys much past 30 minutes. That's the goal each and every day. Jayla McClain, entering his true senior season, came on and as a freshman in 2019 and ended up starting the back half of the season. He finished with 33 tackles, 3 TFLs, 1 sack, and took a step up in 2020 as a sophomore, a true starter, 43 tackles, 2 TFLs, 2.5 TFLs. And then in 2021, his numbers continue to climb up there, 49 tackles, 3.5 TFLs, 3 interceptions. Remember, he had a cast on his hand and had 3 interceptions, but not a very great year as a junior in 2021. What I mean by that, again, it's not everything, but it's something. Pro Football Focus grades. Jayla McClain was the 4th lowest defensive player graded for Tennessee in 2021. Now, one of those guys, Deshaun Rucker, was a backup, only had 38 snaps on the season. One of those guys is Velus Jones Jr., probably on interceptions where he lists 3 defensive reps, so he doesn't really count. So technically, Jayla McClain and Aaron Beasley are the 2 lowest graded players in Tennessee's entire defense in terms of the grades for Pro Football Focus. In 2021, Jayla McClain graded out at a 49.3%. That is easily well below a replaceable grade, okay? Jayla McClain, if you look at, kind of what he's done, what he struggles to do, tackling in space is not very good. Tackling in space, he finished with really a 28.3% average on the season, which is just not good, not at all good. His pass rush was a 62.7, which wasn't, great. Rush defense was 55.3, which is fine. Coverage skills is a 45.2. He, in terms of having some of his better games, he played really, really well against Tennessee Tech, graded out at an 80.5. That was the high mark on the season for him. Graded out as 70.6 against South Alabama. Again, those are 2 teams that he should ball out against. 68.1% in the season opener against Bowling Green. Again, lesser competition, but I continue to point you in the direction of, Florida. 55.1 was his grade per Pro Football Focus. Missouri, where Tennessee dominated, 37.1% per Pro Football Focus. South Carolina, 63%, which is really not all that bad. Ole Miss, 51.7, which is bad. Alabama, 38.1, which is bad. Kentucky, 66.1. That's not horrible. Georgia, 60. All things considered, that's not bad at all, to be completely honest with you. South Alabama, 70.6. Like I said, Vanderbilt, 49.4, and Purdue, 48.0. Those were his defensive averages on the grading scale of Pro Football Focus. Something he really, really struggled with was tackling in space and coverage skills. Tennessee's safeties were a step or two, to be honest with you, slow. You let guys run behind them a lot of times, missing tackles in open space, struggling in man-to-man coverage. Tennessee didn't have quality depth behind these safeties to really push them. And so that's something you're hoping that there's an answer to this year. I still think Jayla McClain and Trayvon Flowers will be your starting safeties come game one, and they'll probably be your starting safeties all year long. But do you have quality guys behind them like a Christian Charles, like an Andre Turrentine, like maybe a Wesley Walker, like Tamiri McDonald, some of these guys that can actually push them to where, hey, if you're not getting the job done, you're going to have to come out and we're going to have to put somebody else in there. You started to see that just a little bit last year, but then Christian Charles got hurt and missed pretty much the entire season after that, or up until the last little bit of the year. So it was really unfortunate in that regard. But Jayla McClain, he's looking slimmer. Reports are that he's had the best offseason that he's ever had. He's taking a step up in terms of leadership. He did have a good spring. We'll see if all those things can help contribute to better play on the field. I would say he's right around about 200 pounds right now, still sitting at about 6 foot. He's got the good size that you want him to, kind of play with in terms of, kind of where you want him to be. But overall, it's just, it's not been the greatest, grade. It's not been the greatest, year for him back in 2021 in terms of kind of what he did. So, and you look at his grades here, they've gone down every single year. Now, in 2019, where he started only half the season per Pro Football Focus, he graded out at 71.2, which is really solid. In 2020, he graded out at 65.0, which you need to get up a little bit, but that's considered a backup player. And then it just all hit the fan in 2021 when he graded out at 49.3. I think a lot of that also has to do with getting used to being on the field for so much. Remember, playing complementary football to a Josh Heupel offense mean you're playing over 100 snaps a game sometimes. Remember against Kentucky, remember against Kentucky, remember against Ole Miss, remember against Alabama. I mean, Tennessee logged tons and tons of defensive snaps. Ole Miss, I believe Tennessee was on the field for 102 snaps. Kentucky was the other one. Take Alabama out, Kentucky. Tennessee was on the field for, I think, 102 snaps against Ole Miss. Kentucky, I want to say 97. It's tough. I get it, but you've got to have better results. So, what Jayla McClain does well, he's physical. What Jayla McClain does well, he's smart. He's where he needs to be. Can Jayla McClain, maybe this is just an easy comparison because you saw it last year with Theo Jackson, but can you take the step off the field this year to where you're going to be better on the field? We'll have to see. But ultimately, you've got to get better play, and the stats and the grades, they back it up. And I think Tennessee's in a position now to where you're hoping that if that production is kind of slacking like it was at points and times last year, that you have guys that can step up and take over and kind of spell these guys because Willie Martinez is only going to play guys that he trusts. And last year, he trusts Theo Jackson, and he trusts Theo Jackson, obviously, but he trusts Trayvon Flowers, and he trusts Jayla McClain. He didn't trust many other people. And so that's the reason why they played so much. But for Tennessee to take a step defensively, they've got to have more consistent and better play from their two safeties, Jayla McClain and Trayvon Flowers. And we'll talk Trayvon Flowers tomorrow. But Jayla McClain, a very, very bad year in 2021. Can he bounce back as a true senior? He still has aspirations to play in the NFL. I'm sure he does. We will find out. And Tennessee's defense as a whole doesn't necessarily depend on that one player, but that does depend on you've got to get better in the back end. And if Jayla McClain gets better, it will certainly help in that regard. All right, that's going to do it here for this episode of Locked On Vols. Thank you so much for your Twitter Tuesday questions and for hanging out with me here today. We'll continue on with the secondary tomorrow, talk Trayvon Flowers, and discuss whatever else is on the docket. We'll catch up with Josh Ward as well and whatever the big story is for Tennessee athletics on a Wednesday. So that's coming up on tomorrow's Locked On Vols. Get more on the SEC by making Locked On SEC your second listen. Every single day, host Chris Gordy and local experts on Locked On take you across the SEC in 30 minutes. Make Locked On SEC your second listen right behind Locked On Vols, which is your first listen each and every day. Guys, thanks so much for hanging out with me. We'll do it again tomorrow. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, follow on YouTube, subscribe there. Leave me a 5-star review and all that on Apple Podcasts. Anything to help the algorithms. Really, really do appreciate it. We'll do it again tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, everybody.